The aroma of garlic bread and thyme lingered softly throughout the dining room, a gentle reminder of the wonderful evening we had just shared. Our neighbors, the Millers and the Johnsons, had departed into the crisp autumn night, their cheerful voices fading as they walked to their cars, eventually overtaken by the distant sound of wind through the trees. Now only the steady rhythm of our antique clock and the quiet buzz of kitchen appliances filled the silence. My husband Richard began what I affectionately called his evening ritual. He stretched dramatically, raising both arms toward the ceiling. With an exaggerated sigh, "Eleanor, that was exceptional. Your peach cobbler was absolutely divine," he said, rubbing his belly with satisfaction. "I'm heading upstairs. Don't keep each other awake all night discussing philosophy. We'll do our best," I replied warmly, as he kissed my forehead. He gave his longtime friend Marcus a pat on the back. "Good night, Marcus. Try not to let her keep you here until dawn. Sleep well, Richard," Marcus responded in his characteristic gentle tone. Then we were alone. Marcus had been Richard's closest companion since their university days. He was woven into the fabric of our family life, the thoughtful best man at our wedding, our daughter's godfather, the reliable presence at every celebration and gathering. A bachelor and literature professor at the nearby college, he possessed a contemplative nature that perfectly balanced my husband's energetic personality. I began collecting the remaining dessert dishes, their surfaces still dotted with crumbs and sticky remnants. "Would you like more coffee, Marcus? Or perhaps something stronger?" He sat comfortably in Richard's preferred chair, the burgundy leather worn smooth from years of use. He gazed at his empty glass thoughtfully. "A bit more whiskey would be lovely. If you don't mind." I moved to the cabinet and poured the golden liquid carefully. The house seemed vast now without our guests' animated conversations. Rain had begun patting against the windows with a soothing rhythm that typically made me feel at peace. Tonight, however, something felt different. The quietness carried an unusual weight, charged with unspoken thoughts like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. When I handed him the glass, our hands touched briefly. It was nothing significant, yet his eyes found mine and lingered there longer than usual. I noticed a melancholy in his expression that I hadn't seen before. "You and Richard have created something truly beautiful, Eleanor," he said softly, swirling the whiskey slowly. "This home, your family, it's genuine and rare." I smiled, settling into the sofa across from him. "We certainly try. It hasn't always been simple, you understand. 4 decades is quite a journey." I laughed gently. Sometimes I watch him dozing in that chair and wonder who this gray-haired stranger is. Marcus didn't join my laughter. He simply observed me with unusual seriousness. "He's an exceptional man, Eleanor. More exceptional than most people understand." His words hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I should cross. It was a simple observation, yet his tone suggested deeper meaning, knowledge I didn't possess. "Of course he is," I said, my voice growing quieter. He sipped his whiskey slowly, his gaze drifting past me toward the rain-streaked window where his reflection stared back. "Do you recall the period when Sarah was roughly 8 years old? Richard was employed at that architectural firm downtown. He despised the daily commute and couldn't stand his supervisor." I nodded slowly, feeling tension build in my chest. "I remember. It was a difficult time. He seemed so overwhelmed." I remembered those exhausting months, how he would return home looking depleted, his shoulders heavy with frustration. I tried to create a peaceful haven for him, though I always sensed there were aspects of his struggle he kept hidden, even from me. "He was miserable," Marcus confirmed in barely a whisper. But an extraordinary opportunity presented itself. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, cradling the glass between his palms. The lamplight created deep shadows across his features, making him appear older and more solemn than I'd ever seen him. The rain intensified against the glass, and our grandfather clock began its midnight chimes. Each bell seemed to echo in the heavy silence that had settled around us. He opened his mouth to continue, and I felt a sudden, chilling certainty that his next words would alter everything forever. Marcus took a measured breath, barely audible. Above the rain, there was a position offered to him, he said, his attention fixed on the amber liquid. Not just any position, it was with an innovative technology company in the Pacific Northwest. Seattle, to be precise. They were pioneering revolutionary work, breaking new ground in their field. They wanted Richard to head their new innovation department. It was everything he had dreamed about since our college days, more financial security than we could have conceived then, and the chance to create something truly meaningful. I stared at him, my thoughts spinning. Seattle, a dream position. I searched my memory desperately, trying to recall this. I remembered the stress of that period, his complaints about his supervisor, but this was completely absent from my recollection. Richard had never mentioned any opportunity in Seattle, not once. I don't understand, I whispered. He never said anything to me. No, Marcus said quietly. He never told you. He knew. You wouldn't have prevented him from accepting. You would have packed up everything in this house. You would have said farewell to your friends. You would have abandoned your beloved garden. You would have followed him anywhere. You would have made that sacrifice gladly. He looked directly at me then, and the sorrow in his eyes felt like a physical blow. But he refused to ask that of you. The room seemed to contract around me. The air became thick and difficult to breathe. I could hear my own pulse, a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He came to me, Marcus continued, his voice steady, like an anchor in my sudden confusion. We met at a tavern, and he explained everything, the offer, the possibilities. He was electrified with excitement initially. Then he grew silent. He just stared into his drink and said, "But Eleanor." He paused, allowing the words to settle. "But Eleanor," he repeated gently. He said, "Eleanor's mother is becoming frail. She needs her daughter nearby. Eleanor's entire world exists here. Her garden is her sanctuary. Her friends are her sisters. If I take her away from everything that nourishes her, what am I truly offering? A larger house? More money? It would be like uprooting a thriving plant just to place it in a more expensive pot. She would wither." I couldn't form words. A cold sensation swept through me, beginning at my feet and rising until it settled as ice in my chest. I thought of my mother's final years, how grateful I was to live so close, to be present for her daily. I thought of my garden, which I had lovingly cultivated for decades, the soil I had worked with my own hands. I thought of my friends, the women who had supported me through every triumph and heartbreak. My life, the life I had always assumed we had simply grown into naturally. He declined their offer, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. He told them he had family obligations he couldn't abandon. He never allowed them the opportunity to negotiate or make a counter-proposal. He returned home that evening and told you he had decided to remain at his current position, that circumstances were improving. It was a lie. He stayed in that position. He detested for another few years until he could secure something else locally. He did this so you wouldn't have to sacrifice your world. He chose your happiness over his professional ambitions, and he decided you should never bear the burden of knowing about that choice. I sat there, completely motionless. It wasn't the stillness of fear or anger, it was the paralysis of revelation, of having the entire foundation of my marriage suddenly revealed in a completely new light. 4 decades of shared experiences, of laughter, of disagreements over meaningless things, of comfortable silences, everything suddenly appeared different. The man I believed I knew completely, the predictable, steady Richard who complained about his commute and praised my cooking, was a stranger to me. He was a man who had carried a secret sacrifice, a profound act of love, for decades, without ever speaking of it. The foundation of my world hadn't cracked, it had simply revealed itself to be far deeper and more extraordinary than I had ever imagined. The image of him, my husband sleeping peacefully upstairs, suddenly felt impossibly distant, like a character from a story I was only beginning to comprehend. The grandfather clock seemed to tick more loudly now, each second marking another moment of my ignorance. Marcus sat watching me, his expression filled with gentle, shared sorrow. He hadn't shared this story to cause pain, I realized, but to deliver a truth he believed I deserved to know. He had been the guardian of my husband's greatest secret, the silent witness to an act of profound devotion. My throat felt constricted. When I finally found my voice, it emerged as a fragile whisper. "Why are you telling me this now, Marcus?" He sighed deeply and placed his empty glass on the side table. "Because time is precious, Eleanor. Richard would never share this with you, it's not his way. He believes it would be selfish, that it would sound like he was seeking recognition. But I observe you both. I see the comfort, the routine. It's beautiful, but I think sometimes we forget the choices that created that comfort. I see how he watches you when you're unaware, when you're laughing with your friends or tending your roses. The love is still there. so profound. I simply thought you should understand the full depth of it. He rose, his tall frame seeming to fill the quiet space. I should leave. It's late. I stood on unsteady legs, my body feeling disconnected from my thoughts. I accompanied him to the front door in silence. The rain had softened to a gentle mist. The air that drifted in was cool and carried the scent of wet earth and night-blooming jasmine from the vine beside our porch. "Thank you, Marcus," I managed to say, though the words felt inadequate for the gift he had just given me. He simply nodded, squeezed my arm gently, and walked into the night. I watched his car's red lights disappear down the street before quietly closing and locking the door. I pressed my forehead against the cool wood, my eyes closed. Frozen, that's what he had left me. Not with coldness, but with a breathtaking, crystalline stillness. The routines, the minor irritations, the comfortable predictability of my life with Richard, it all felt transformed. It wasn't a life we had settled for. It was a life he had, actively, silently chosen for me. Slowly, I made my way through the darkened house. The familiar creak of the fourth step sounded like a note from a half-remembered melody. I gently pushed open our bedroom door. Soft moonlight filtered through the blinds, creating silver patterns across the comforter. Richard was deep in sleep, lying on his side with one arm stretched across the pillow where my head should rest. He was making that gentle rumbling sound I sometimes playfully teased him about. I didn't see the man who left coffee cups on the counter or forgot to close dresser drawers. I saw a young man in a tavern, his heart torn between a brilliant future and the woman he loved. I saw the quiet strength it must have required to walk away from his dreams to protect mine. All these years I thought he was simply content. He was, actively nurturing my happiness, tending to it as carefully as I tended my garden. I approached his side of the bed and looked down at his face, softened by sleep. The lines around his eyes and mouth were maps of a life I thought I knew completely, but now I saw unexplored territories, hidden depths I had never discovered. An overwhelming wave of love washed over me, so powerful and fierce it nearly brought me to my knees. It was love renewed, deepened, and redefined. I didn't wake him. The secret wasn't mine to confront, it was his to keep. The knowledge was enough. I slipped into bed beside him, careful not to disturb his rest. I lay there in the peaceful darkness, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, the steady beat of the heart of the man who had silently built our world on a foundation of his own sacrifice. And for the first time in many, many years, I felt like I was truly seeing